Good morning everyone, Professor Apex here from Chin Track Days. Today we're doing a different kind of tutorial. We are going to be installing some new StopTech brakes on Stormcloud, our NC 2.5 liter track car. One of the things, we built this car here about a year ago. It's got a 2.5 conversion in it, Olin suspension, and the car is absolutely spectacular on track. The one thing we don't like is the brakes. The brakes are not very confidence inspiring, get a lot of knockback on them. You can take a look here and you can look at the caliper and see that we've definitely been getting a lot of heat in there, even with the cooling ducts. So I did some research online trying to find the right brake package for this, and everything I saw out there had these Wilwood calipers. My previous experience with Wilwood was not a positive experience. Typically I think those may be good for autocross or street cars, but for real heavy duty track use with slicks at brake intensive tracks, we needed something better. So what I found was StopTech's kit. This is their newest kit here with the CP43 caliper here. You can tell right away when you look at this, this is not a street caliper at all. There's no dust seals. This is an anodized finished. And their full floating rotor kit. Again, not a street package here. It's going to be noisy. It's going to rattle around. This is a 309 millimeter by 32 millimeter thick rotor. So it's not quite as big around as some, but we've got a lot of thickness here to handle the heat. And also 20 millimeter thick pads here. When you start talking about consumable costs, when you get a pad this thick, you'll find brake pads in this kind of universal backing plate design are actually less expensive than pads for an OEM caliper here. So we're excited about getting this installed on the car. Alright, so the first step we're going to do is to remove the stock components. Here's a pro tip. Anytime you're working on the hydraulic braking system here and you're going to have that disconnected, go ahead and use something to push the brake pedal in just a little bit. You don't need it fully actuated, just push the brake pedal in a little bit, and that will keep brake fluid from completely siphoning and draining out of there. It closes that little valve in the master cylinder. Don't forget to either disconnect the battery or pull the brake light bulbs. So we're going to use this little 1-man bleeder and an 8 millimeter wrench to open up this bleed screw here. Remember, since what we've got, we have the brake pedal depressed, so we can't push the piston in, okay, without giving the fluid someplace to go. So, do this. And press the piston. So that we can remove it. And that should be far enough. I will often use a little garbage can sitting underneath this when I'm working on it, just to, if I do drip any fluid out, it goes in the can there. Our next step is going to be to disconnect the line. We're going to use a 12 millimeter socket, and right on the back side you'll see a banjo bolt for the brake line. There we go. And we're done with those parts. Now we can actually remove everything. We can remove this caliper and bracket as a single piece because we're not going to be putting it back on. So I'm going to use my Milwaukee impact wrench, 17 millimeter socket, and make quick work of this. Now we can remove the line, and what we're going to use is a flare nut wrench. This is a 10 millimeter flare nut wrench. Please make sure you use an appropriate flare nut wrench. If you just use a box end wrench on this, you're likely to just strip this head off, and now you're stuck using vice grips and you gum up this whole end and you've got a big old mess to fix. Okay, we're out there. 12 millimeter also removes these bolts. We'll probably get a little bit of fluid out here as we siphon out what's in the line. Just a little bit. StopTech kit includes its own proprietary lines. These are the Mazda Motorsports ones that we had out from before, which we will not be using. Sure to check eBay soon for some slightly used Mazda Motorsports brake lines. Alright, so the removal is complete. Pretty simple. We do have one issue here. So we're using Koenig wheels. These are by a 17 by 8 with a plus 45 offset. And what we found when we used the template is that we're going to need a little extra clearance for the caliper. Goodwin Racing has on their website, they have a link to a little cutout, a fitment diagram of this caliper. So you can take it in your wheels and see if this fits. It's one of the things with the wider rotor, the thicker pads, and this caliper, it does take a little more clearance. What I found when I did that, I was going to need about a 5 millimeter spacer. So we're going to press in some new studs here. Stock studs are not long enough. We're going to put in some ARP studs so we can use a 5 millimeter spacer. So, back here, this is 14 millimeter. And we're going to pull these 4 bolts out here so that we can pull this hub out. Now, I'm not going to take them all the way out to begin with because what happens is this gets seated into the upright really hard. It doesn't just fall right out. So we're going to have to use a little bit of persuasion to get that out. Now, the factory service manual shows that there is a special little tool that pushes this hub out. I don't have that. I've had these hubs off one time before when we installed the brake cooling kit from Goodwin. So I know this method works, and also when I was in there I put some liberal coating of anti-seize to help make the removal a little bit easier. Again, we're going to take them about halfway out. We're going to need to remove the ABS sensor, which is a 10 millimeter. That's right back here. Certainly don't want to leave that in there and then pull the hub out and we put pressure on this line. 10 millimeter bolt, it slides out and you can put it up on top here, out of the way. So now we need to provide some persuasion very gently. Tapping on these bolts, and we're going to have to kind of go side by side and work our way Created a little bit of an air gap. Let's hope we've got it out far enough that we can use a different type of persuasion. There we go. Hub remove, you'll see I put some anti-seize in there last time I had it out, so I was actually cheating. So our next stop is going to be the press, where we will press in some ARP studs. These again are available right on Goodwin's website.
4, 3.
Alright, so here we are. We're going to press these studs out with my little press here. This is just an inexpensive press that I picked up at Harbor Freight years ago. Comes in handy for little jobs like this. This is pretty straightforward. We're going to use a socket. This is just a deep well socket, impact socket, to go behind the stud here to act as a pressing plate. So I'm going to put it in like this, drive the press down like so, and drive that stud out just like that. Studs remove installation, very similar. I'm going to use that socket as a backup plate and push the stud. Again, you can probably use a couple nuts and use those to tighten the stud going in here. However, what I've heard is that when you're doing that, you're kind of almost stretching that stud. Just like that. New studs. Okay, so we're ready to reinstall this hub. And one of the things I want to do is I expect at some point in the future this hub is going to need to be removed again. So I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on here. This stuff, a little goes a long way. You get one single drop of this, probably covers 3,000 square feet. You'll know that if you've ever gotten any on your fingers before. So I'm going to use a little rag here just to kind of spread it around. This way it won't rust in there, and when it's time to replace these wheel bearings, we'll be able to get it out. So the sensor is oriented at the top. I'm going to line this up and start it in just a little bit. Okay, so here's what we're going to try and do. Our goal is that we're actually going to use the factory screws to bring this and pull it into the hub. So to line up, we get one screw started, other 3 screws in. Just got those snugged up. And now we're going to kind of go around in a pattern here and just slowly tighten it up. Track your progress by seeing how far the screw is actually coming into the hub itself. Alright, we've got all the screws now are fully seated. Now it's time to get this set to the right torque. And so this is from the factory service manual. We are looking at 39.9 to 44.2 foot-pounds. Half. There we go. Now we can begin the fun part, the actual install of the brake package. Now when I was fitting this bracket on the other side, slight clearance issue. With this, and it looks like we're going to have it here. Just very slight clearance issue to the Goodwin Racing package there. Which, well, you know what? This side is actually going to go. It was very minor, just about the thickness of the paint, actually. So, all right, these are good. Now, StopTech says to use red Loctite on this, so we're going to do some of that. So I'm actually give you a little bit of red Loctite on these. Those are 17 millimeters, so we're going to torque those down. Now the factory rating on these bolts is a little bit different than StopTech's, what they call for in the instructions there. They call for 65 foot-pounds. Seeing as how the OEM is a cast iron bracket, this is aluminum. I'm going to go with StopTech's recommendation because the aluminum can probably handle a little less torque than the cast iron bracket. So we have to go to our different torque wrench right here because whenever we're torquing something down, we kind of want to try and be in the middle of the range. So it's not, torque wrenches are not one size fits all. This one's in Newton meters, so we're actually going to run this one up to 88. Yep. And while we're here and we notice, let's go ahead and put the ABS sensor back in place. Alright, so now we're going to get down to the fun stuff. This here is the rotor, and StopTech's done a great job here of actually just putting a little dot here so you know that this is left or right. Slide the rotor on, and I'm going to take just a couple nuts here, spin them on to hold this rotor up. Just to kind of hold it in place for us there. Next, the caliper. Again, the caliper is designated left or right. The main thing you're looking at is that your bleeders are on the top side. And we also want to look at the piston differential. Here, as we see, we have one piston is larger than the other. And they kind of give you a sheet here that shows exactly which direction those should be oriented. Studs. Each of these get a little washer. And StopTech is speccing 40 foot-pounds on those, 40 foot-pounds. Now the one trickiest part here, or the part that I don't like, is the brake line. It's always my least favorite part. It's using these stainless steel lines because they don't ever seem to clear, kind of like the OEM ones do. So, also on these, they do give us a left and right designation right on this little tab right here. So, I'm going to install this here. This is the section that will ride up in here. So I'm going to just start this a little bit here. We want to leave it loose so that we can still spin this line around so we can get it orientated right on the other edge. We can go ahead and slide it in. That down, we've got the one end. Now we'll pull out the little rubber plug, which is right back here. And this is where this line gets assembled to, right to there. So for sealing here, we've got two copper washers, and one copper washer is going to go on each side of the banjo bolt, and then we thread it into here, and I'm going to keep that again a little bit loose as well while we try to find the best location here. Now typically these have been designed to hold it down like this. This one actually looks pretty good. What I noticed with the Mazda Motorsports one, this was almost a little bit too low and resulted in a chance of wanting to hit here. So let's see how this one lines up. On those I flipped this bracket upside down, and that held it further away from any of the moving parts. This does look pretty clear. And then we're going to kind of go through full range of motion here. See where we're at. I think we're in good shape right there. Of course, that's going to be kind of sitting out there. We still... All right, we'll go with that. Tighten this up. And we have to tighten this banjo bolt. And they recommend 14 foot-pounds. It's only 14 foot-pounds, so it is not a lot of pressure on there. You don't want to go in there and ham-fist it. Tighten it up as tight as you can get it. And of course, once we bleed all this, you will have to hold this back because it's going to want to rotate on this. And that's it. That is all the torque it takes. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten the flare nut in. Again, this is a 10 millimeter flare nut wrench. You will need a 17 millimeter. Going to want to use a backup wrench on here to hold the back side of it. Okay. Pull this out, blast in. Are the brake pads. And the brake pad. StopTech doesn't really have a listed torque for this specific one. It is a lock nut on there, so we don't have to tighten it up. Again, no hand-fisted tightening on this. And there, all the fun stuff is done. The only thing left in this car is we're going to do a full bleed on it. It's time to change all the fluid in this car as well. I recommend you start with this kind of doing a gravity bleed. So we'll go ahead and take our 2x4 out of off the brake pedal, and we'll put our bottle on here. We'll open the valve and we'll just kind of let it sit, and that'll allow some of the fluid to get on down here without us having to do all the work and pumping. And there you have it. Next video that you're going to see on these brakes, we're going to be at Watkins Glen here in just a couple weeks. So we're going to be testing this car out with these new brakes. We've got video with data overlay from our previous laps at Watkins Glen, and we'll be able to overlay the difference that these brakes made. And I'm pretty confident we're going to see a difference there, because everyone was driving the car was concerned about the brakes, and that really affects your driving as well. I know Mark even kind of blew the bus stop one time over there. So, all right, thanks again, and I hope to see you at the track soon.